Trump is signaling he may send American troops onto Mexican soil.
We've knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by water, and we are going to start now hitting land with regard to the cartels. The cartels are running Mexico.
Este plan de acción.
Mexico has previously turned down Trump's offer of military intervention, but is concerned Trump will act on his own, like he did in Venezuela.
And I think for Canada, that's also dangerous.
Trump's warning directed at Mexico was neither vague nor speculative. He openly spoke about the possibility of deploying U.S. military forces onto Mexican territory under the banner of combating drug cartels and so-called narco-terrorism. Mexico responded with an unequivocal rejection, leaving no room for alternative interpretation. That rejection, however, did not cause Trump to hesitate. We have already seen what happens when he decides that consensus is no longer necessary. Venezuela stands as the clearest example. Trump has made it unmistakably clear that he views the use of force as a routine policy instrument, rather than a last resort after all other options have failed. More importantly, he has also demonstrated a belief that borders, national sovereignty, and even international law itself can be bargained away if they stand in the way of his objectives. It is this point that makes the situation particularly dangerous. This is not diplomatic pressure in the traditional sense, this is coercion. And coercion does not stop on its own. Canada is not outside this story. From the very early stages of Trump's new political chapter, Canada and Mexico have been grouped together within the same frame. When Trump speaks about border security, fentanyl, or the enforcement of trade rules, he frequently refers to the two countries as a single bloc, regardless of the very real differences in circumstances, responsibility, or scale. That approach is telling. It suggests that Trump does not view North America as three equal sovereign nations, but rather as a pressure zone, one in which tariffs, threats, and even force can be applied at will. For Canada, this is not entirely unfamiliar. Phrases such as the 51st state, questions about the legitimacy of Canada's borders, and a dismissive attitude toward Canadian sovereignty have surfaced before. Now, with military threats directed at Mexico placed within that same broader picture, the level of risk rises sharply. Consider the sequence. First came Venezuela, justified on security grounds, then Greenland, framed as a matter of defense, and now Mexico under the pretext of counterterrorism. The justifications shift, but the underlying logic does not. Trump is steadily normalizing the idea of using force in the Western Hemisphere, so long as it is presented as serving U.S. interests. This represents a structural shift, and whether it wishes to or not, Canada sits squarely within the trajectory of that way of thinking.
Analysts say Canada could be most exposed.
If you are weak and you are doing stuff Trump doesn't like, and you can be an ally or you can be an adversary, right? You can be Canada or you can be Venezuela, but you get FAFO'd.
In a recent interview with the New York Times, Trump said that he's not constrained by international law or Congress, but by his own morality. He says that's the only thing that can stop him.
This needs to be stated plainly. The greatest threat facing Canada is not the image of tanks crossing the border. The real danger lies in things far more subtle and far more realistic. It lies in quiet coercion, in power that is assumed rather than declared, in unilateral actions wrapped in the language of security. This can take the form of the United States increasing its military presence in Canada's airspace or maritime zones. It may appear as patrols described as temporary, and then gradually decisions begin to be made for Canada rather than with Canada. Once such precedents are established, sovereignty does not disappear overnight. It is eroded step by step through small decisions until it becomes difficult to pinpoint the exact moment when a line was crossed. Greenland and Mexico may appear unrelated at first glance. In reality, they are pieces of a much larger picture, control over the hemisphere as a whole. Trump's particular interest in Greenland was never merely symbolic. It centers on the Arctic, new shipping routes, access to energy, and military advantage as ice recedes and strategic competition intensifies. In that context, Canada's Arctic infrastructure is still in the process of being completed. Canada's presence, though strengthened, remains thin at key points. It is precisely this gap that creates temptation, not for open occupation, but for assumed authority. The assumption that patrols are necessary, the assumption that intervention serves collective security, and the assumption that Canada will accept all of this in silence. That is how sovereignty is tested in the modern world, not through a direct strike, but through small steps, reasonable on paper, yet dangerous in practice.
So with the capture of Nicolas Maduro and the talk of Trump trying to take over Greenland, plus all those 51st state threats last year,
I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
that suddenly propelled the question, is Canada under threat from the US? Well, not exactly, but many of the experts we spoke to are increasingly concerned by the moves from the Trump administration.
In the last 2 weeks, there's been another shift, another fundamental shift that suggests that the world is even more dangerous now for Canada than it was before.
Now, those concerns stem from a statement from the White House on Tuesday, saying that the US wants to acquire Greenland for security reasons and is discussing a range of options, including utilizing the US military. Thomas Homer-Dixon, executive director at the Cascade Institute, says Canada should be prepared for possible military coercion from the United States.
The Trump administration might try to use some kind of explicit or implicit military coercion against us, either in the Arctic or with respect to some of the boundaries, Canadian boundaries, which President Trump has already declared he doesn't think are legally valid.
He says the fact that the Trump administration has been so explicit about possible military intervention in Greenland, it's really set the tone for Canada.
In a sense,
from a broader perspective, what makes this period particularly risky is that Trump's approach is not directed at individual countries alone. It is eroding the entire rules-based system that Canada has long relied upon. The belief that disputes should be resolved multilaterally, that the use of force is an exception rather than a standing policy tool, and that national borders carry real meaning. Canada has been one of the strongest defenders of that system in the Western Hemisphere, and for that very reason, it serves both as a stabilizing force and as a potential target for pressure. This is the core of the issue. Canada is not paralyzed, Canada is not silent, and Canada is not standing still. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney, Ottawa has begun to proactively shield itself from precisely this kind of pressure. Europe has been mobilized. Global leaders have spoken out clearly against annexationist rhetoric. France has warned that any threat directed at Canada would cause serious harm to the global order. NATO allies are watching closely. Canada's commitments in the Arctic are being reinforced both politically and materially. This is no longer a Canada that can be easily isolated as it once was. Trump's strategy has always relied on division. Pressure works only when a country is left alone. Canada has taken deliberate steps to ensure that this will not happen. By building alliances early, aligning itself openly with other regions facing similar threats, and remaining firm in its commitment to global norms, Canada has shifted the balance. Any threat directed at Canada now is no longer a simple bilateral matter. It would carry global consequences, and Trump understands this well, regardless of how much he may appear to dismiss it. Trump's threats toward Mexico should put Canada on alert, not because war is imminent, but because they signal that restraint is no longer treated as the default position.